Hey everybody, it's me. I'm just stopping in here before the video to quickly let you know that right before I decided to record and edit this video and write the script, I came down with COVID. So if you find my voice to be a little strange in this recording, it's because I was quite sick. I didn't get super sick, but it wasn't fun. And also, I still have COVID now. So, in these live action parts, I'm going to be sitting at my desk. I just don't have it in me right now to, be standing up over there. I apologize, but, we're going to be more intimate here. So I'm comfy, I'm sitting here, and we're going to go and get into the video. And, I'm wearing my big hooded sweatshirt. If I wanted, I could look like some sort of evil wizard during this. I don't think I'll do that. I think that my personal favorite generation of RPG has to be the mid to late 90s. This time period gave way to so many classics in the genre, titles like Final Fantasy VII, Suikoden 2, and Chrono Cross. Games like these fueled many late summer nights when I was a kid. I can vividly remember getting in trouble for staying up until 4 AM playing Chrono Trigger. I blame the PS1 version's 35-minute load screens for that one personally. Growing up in a rural area, I remember grinding the sphere grid in Final Fantasy X late at night, listening to the sound of crickets and frogs in this little pond near our house. It's a vibe, for sure, and the stories that came along with the games like these have influenced my life in ways I can't even fully explain. RPGs got me into long-form storytelling. They were a major influence on me getting into creative writing. I probably wouldn't even be making this video if it weren't for those late summer nights. A key element of so many of these stories is adventure, leaving home to visit faraway lands and see extraordinary sights, meeting and befriending new people, or standing up to some evil or unknown force. Grandia fits this description to a T. In fact, it fits it so well that it's almost detrimental. It's a game that molds itself into the textbook form of adventure, for better or for worse. Originally released for the Sega Saturn in 1997, Grandia would go on to become the fourth best-selling Saturn game of that year. Developed by GameArts, who are best known for also creating the Lunar series, Grandia garnered critical acclaim in Japan, as well as stacks of cash. The Saturn version alone would eventually sell over 1 million copies. Even the US PlayStation Magazine will call the game the best RPG for the Sega Saturn on their list of top 25 games you must play in 1999. And it was in 1999 that Grandia would be released on the Sony PlayStation, and while it still sold a fair amount of copies and reviewed well, people were a little less kind to it. Final Fantasy VII and VIII had been released by then and had become the scale on which every other RPG would inevitably be measured upon. This is evident in the GameSpot review of the PS1 version, where the author described the translation and dub as inexcusable. A little harsh, but okay. Yes, it seems by this time most people had moved on from 2D pixel art adventures and were craving more polygonal pretty boys as technology advanced. And that's actually pretty funny, because despite being released on the PS1 along with the more technically advanced Final Fantasy VIII, Grandia actually took a graphical hit when it was released on the original PlayStation. The frame rate on the PlayStation version is not as smooth, and there are places in-game that lack shadow and other detail. Also, the PlayStation version has that wonderful texture warping that all PS1 games seem to have, and you either love or hate that due to nostalgia, I think. The water textures were also less impressive, and ground textures on the battle screen were lower quality, but hey, that's the price the West paid to play Grandia back in the day. For this video, I'm playing the Steam version of the HD remaster, which has its good and bad points. To get them out of the way really quickly, I'm not a fan of the weird smoothing filter that they put over everything. I like those chunky pixels, and this makes everyone look like they're covered in Vaseline. There's a way to remove the filter on the PC version, but I didn't know that until I'd already beaten it. And while widescreen is cool, I really hate this weird blur they put on the sides of cutscenes. To be blunt, it looks pretty terrible. Like, guys, please just leave black bars on the sides or use a simple blur. Look, I can make this look better literally right now. Other than that, the HD remaster is pretty cool, and it's available on PC and Switch, so it's readily available even if it's not the best way to play if you're a purist. But all of that is sort of beside the point when it comes to this video. Let's get into how Grandia is a time capsule of 1997. How it presents an endearing and energetic view on what adventure can be, and how one kid would save the world. This is Grandia. Parm is a city stuck somewhere between a fantasy setting and the Industrial Revolution. Cobblestone streets worm their way through the city, and squares featuring fountains with gathering townsfolk are a common sight. Just beyond the alleyway is a large metal fence and fortified gate holding a garrison of saber-wielding soldiers. Children play at nightly adventures in the streets while the adults drink away afternoons in the nearby basement pub. Yes, this is a city that feels pulled between two realities, and it's here that we meet our main character, Justin. Justin is a 14-year-old boy who spends his days in Parm playing with his friends and just generally causing trouble. He's the son of a great adventurer, and although his father is never named during the game, he's a role model for Justin and someone that our main character always tries to live up to. One of the only mementos that Justin has of his father is a strange stone covered in mysterious markings. Justin is convinced that this is the spirit stone of Angelonian legend. It's this belief that spurs Justin on to want to be an adventurer like his father, even though people around him sort of make fun of him and tell him it's a silly aspiration. Most people that we meet tell us that there's no point to being an adventurer as people have already found the end of the world, a huge wall that no one has ever been able to cross. Justin can't be dissuaded, however, and goes off with his childhood friend Sue to sneak into the nearby Salt ruins. Here the duo are denied entrance by the Garlisle military, but as we see again, Justin just can't be turned from his path of adventure. Sneaking through the ruins and taking out the resident slimes while avoiding soldiers, eventually Justin and Sue come to a strange-looking statue. Justin's spirit stone begins to softly glow before opening a door that leads the two deeper into the ruins. It's inside these chambers that they meet Liette, or, well, a projection of her. She's a mysterious entity that bestows Justin and Sue with a vision of them floating high above the planet. Liette tells Justin he has a real spirit stone and that he should venture to the new continent and pass the end of the world to visit Alent, the city of the Angelonians. We also hear about something called Icarians, but so far it's not really explained. For now, we just assume there's some sort of ancient race of beings that lived alongside humans. Hearing all of this is all Justin needs to send him off on his big adventure. It's his call to action, if you will. And hey, if Justin gets one, so do I. You should definitely leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I swear to God, you'll only regret it just a little bit. In the ruins, we also meet Lean and Mullen, two Garlisle officers that are overseeing the excavation. After speaking with Liette, Justin and Sue are cornered and chased from the ruins by them. And now, knowing that the military is also looking for the Spirit Stone and Alent for unexplained reasons, Justin sets off across the sea in search of adventure. Oh, and I'd be remiss not to mention Justin's mom, who, although she doesn't have a big role in the story, is an awesome former pirate. I wish she was my mom. Ouch! After telling Sue that she's too small to go along on the adventure and having her freak out and kick him, Justin finally boards a ship for the new continent, not knowing what would lie before him. He also didn't know Sue would stow away on the ship, causing them both to get into trouble and work at swabbing the deck in a minigame I just couldn't get for some reason. It's on this ship that we meet Fina, the green-haired, whip-wielding professional adventurer that everyone looks up to. Justin immediately wants to prove himself to the person known as New Parm's best adventurer, so he's the first person to volunteer to take care of the spooky ghost ship that shows up halfway through the voyage. Justin, Fina, and Sue fight off the ghostly invaders, including a giant pissed-off squid that's one of the hardest bosses in the game due to the party being a fairly low level. After that ordeal and arriving in New Parm, we head directly to the illustrious Adventurer Society in order to join, only to find it's basically an overblown tourism board with an annoying idiot as its president. The moronic president of the Adventurers Society, named Pakon, is the son of the former president. He takes Fina hostage in order to marry her, and Justin and Sue, knowing this is really wrong, decide to go and break her out. The result is Pakon banning all of us from ever being a part of the Adventurer Society, but Justin really doesn't care. To him, being an adventurer is a calling. It's a need to see new sights, an ever-encroaching sense of wanderlust, and it can't be taken away by anyone. Fina agrees with this outlook and decides to join Justin and Sue on their adventure to find Alent. The newly formed trio head to the nearby Dom ruins in search of more information about Alent. There they find another room where they are able to speak to Liette deep inside the ruins. She tells the party that they're still a long way from Alent and that they need to continue east. Justin voices his concern, saying the end of the world is nearby, and Liette responds by confirming what Justin knew in his heart all along. There is no end of the world. Now being chased by Garlisle forces because of his possession of the Spirit Stone, Justin along with Fina and Sue head eastward. They rescue a humanoid kid named Rem from soldiers, and right after healing him, get captured and taken to a Garlisle base. Mysteriously, Lean shows up to speak with Justin, leaving him a key to his cell. This leads us to escape using the ventilation system with the full party plus Rem, stealing a military train in the process. Rem is happy enough with our help to lead us through the Misty Forge to Luke Village, the home of his people. Unfortunately, it seems that Mullen and Lean let us escape in order to lead them there. The military performs an operation to steal the villagers' idol from the peak of a nearby mountain, as it's made of a spirit stone, and they believe that this will allow them to unlock the mysteries of ancient technology. There's a struggle at the mountain peak, causing the idol to split in half, and although Justin feels terrible about this, the Elder is pretty chill about it anyway, and clears the mist in the rest of the forest, allowing us to make it to the end of the world. Oh, we also find out during this whole ordeal that Lean and Fina are actually sisters. I'm sure that won't come back later. Anyway, with the way being clear, we travel through the remaining section of the Misty Forest and come to the end of the world. A giant wall extending upwards as far as the eye can see. The thing is gigantic, a crazy feat of architecture and construction, and it's obviously not a natural formation. The thing might be one of my favorite dungeons in the game so far. The party climbs the side of the wall, seeing some crazy sights and contraptions on the way, even stopping to make camp. When the party finally makes it to the top, we are treated to a spectacular view. Seems the end of the world really wasn't the end as the sun begins to rise, illuminating a vast landscape stretching as far as the eye can see. It's really a triumphant moment, not only for Justin and the rest of the party, but also for the player. Grandia is a strange world where information isn't easily laid out for you, so finally seeing the other side of the wall is like a breath of fresh air. Also, we knew from the beginning that crossing the end of the world was going to be a big stepping stone on the journey, and here we have completed that step. Up until this point, we've also collected a trio of pretty fun and colorful characters. Justin and Sue have a really great sibling-like relationship, and I actually taught Sue water and healing magic, so she was quite important in battle for a really long time. Fina brings some much-needed self-assured badassery to the group. Being the only pro-adventurer, she fills the role of mentor when her and Justin first meet. However, soon after that, his unrelenting optimism pushes her to see him as more of an equal. I think there's something to be said for Justin's attitude throughout 99% of this game. The kid is just so optimistic and rooted in his belief that everything will work out if they just try. It's a character trope that's very popular among shonen anime protagonists, and it had started to wane by the time Final Fantasy VIII had come around. However, I find it refreshing playing Grandia in 2022. I've had my fill of angsty protagonists for a little bit, so the unyielding optimism is a nice change of pace. Grandia has a semi-turn-based battle system which absolutely carries the entire game throughout parts of the story that are relatively razor-thin. Luckily, this battle system, along with the skill and magic experience system, make this game a pretty addicting experience as far as combat goes. Each character in battle advances along the segmented line in the battle UI. At a certain point on the line, the game will pause and you can input commands for that specific character. Depending upon the command given, the character then takes a certain amount of time to perform the action. Now where the strategy comes in is in the final section of the bar. If you can cause a critical strike on an enemy with a physical attack or certain spells, you can actually cancel their action. This becomes so invaluable later on in the game, it's just as powerful as it sounds. There's this one late game boss that just didn't even get to go because I canceled their actions so often. Many spells and weapons also cause something called IP damage to the enemy, which basically means that along with damaging their health, it also either pauses or slows their IP bar progress. Most characters can use multiple weapon classes like swords, axes, bows, and daggers, and on top of leveling up when gaining enough experience, your weapon and magic skills also level up independently. Use a sword in combat, you're going to get sword experience at the end of battle, and when it inevitably adds up to 100, it levels up. Same goes for casting a fire spell. Every spell has an element with associated experience and levels. Now the cool part is not only does leveling up the weapons and magic skills unlock new spells and abilities, it also has an impact on each character's overall stats as well. Every time a character levels up their skill with axes, they'll get a +2 to their strength skill, increasing their overall damage output with physical attacks. A level in water magic increases your overall HP by 1, giving your character more survivability. It's with this system that you can sort of mold each character any way you want, and if you're so inclined, grind a shit ton. You want Justin to do 500 damage with every regular attack? You got an axe to grind, buddy. And like I said, not only do your stats increase, you unlock incredibly good skills and spells. And believe me, you want a character with high water magic in your party because later on, those healing spells are going to become completely invaluable. Magic schools also combine with one another, so having a certain level in earth and fire magic will unlock explosive spells. Or my personal favorite, water and wind magic combining to make screen clearing lightning magic. The later spells are usually enough to wipe most regular enemies from the map in one shot and significantly damage a boss. Along with spells, characters are also able to access special physical attacks using weapon skills. These are also pretty invaluable later on, especially when it comes to canceling and delaying enemy attacks. And then there's something like Justin's Dragon Cut, which is a high damage all target attack that never fails to significantly damage everything on the screen. Not only are these attacks quite powerful, they're also flashy and fun to watch. For most of them, they're also quite snappy too, which is a blessing considering how often you'll be casting them. Most of Grandia takes place in winding and vast dungeons. Towns and villages are also very prominent throughout the game, with transitional areas being not much more than selectable entries on a map. Kinda similar to how Shadow Hearts does it actually. Believe me when I say this game has a lot of dungeons, like a lot of dungeons. Almost any time the party has to go to a specific location, you can bet that you'll have to trudge through multiple dungeons just to get there, which means you'll be spending a lot of time in the luckily very engrossing combat. These dungeons contain winding passages filled with nasty monsters, and many of them featuring damaging traps and disorienting puzzles. Littered around the dungeons are item caches and piles of coins that you really don't want to miss, as the equipment is essential in keeping up with the monster's damage output. Unfortunately, scouring the dungeons for all the equipment and cache is easier said than done, even for the most experienced adventurer. Grandia has a compass that always shows you which way is north, and its dungeons have these points where you can zoom the camera out to get a bird's eye view, but these are almost always completely useless. Grandia surprisingly has no dungeon maps or mini-maps of any kind, making some of these multi-floor reality-bending dungeons kind of a headache to navigate, especially if you're trying to find all the items. And you might say, oh, that's fine, I'll just grind battles and buy equipment from the shops in town. But you really can't even do that, because in order to teach characters new elements of magic, you need an item called a mana egg. And wouldn't you know it, these incredibly valuable items are only found scattered about in dungeons, so you kind of have to scour every inch if you want your characters to have access to all the magic possible. Honestly, the best solution I could come up with was GameFAQs. Yes, the site is still around, sporting its blue and white color scheme and sometimes impressive ASCII art. Found a walkthrough with dungeon layouts and markers for equipment, and I gotta say, even then, some of these dungeons were confusing. So yeah, get ready for a lot of walking around lost, unless you want to look up a guide, and I haven't even commented on the backtracking, oh lord. Now look, I don't think every game needs to do the Skyrim thing where there's a convenient exit right next to the final treasure, but in Grandia, finishing a dungeon just means walking right back out of it, all the way to the start, and the enemies don't respawn, and neither do any of the treasure or any of the piles of gold. So you just sort of backtrack through an empty dungeon for most of them in Grandia. It's an annoyance and definitely a product of its time, but I did make it through a couple of podcasts doing this. I think that Grandia is such a charming looking game. Weird HD collection Vaseline filter aside, I really love this era of 2D, 3D melded pixel art. As you can tell, all the characters are sprite-based, but things like buildings, level geometry, and dungeon items are all very low-poly 3D models. Battle effects are also an amalgamation of 2D particles and 3D effects that just look really unique. Along with the pixel art being highly detailed and expressive, it's also very brightly colored, which helps the characters stand out from the background textures. I also have to throw a kudos to the variety that comes to the different 3D models. There are more than a few towns and villages in Grandia, and all of them have unique texture set with unique modeling for prominent buildings. It's a nice touch, and it's cool to see how the different peoples of the Grandia world live. Voice acting is kind of an interesting part of Grandia as well. For one, it's pretty impressive that Grandia has voice acting at all, even though it's just for certain scenes. On the other hand, the voice acting that is here isn't very good. In fact, some of it is downright terrible. Mullen in particular is pretty bad, almost comical with a lot of the line delivery. And he's a character with a good amount of voice lines too. Luckily, Justin, Sue, and Fina are pretty good as far as their lines go, with Justin probably being the best out of everyone. Luckily, the HD remaster does include the original Japanese dub, if the English voices are too corny for you to handle. Music in Grandia is pretty great all around, with the main theme being a standout on the OST. Really gets that whimsical feeling of adventure going. It's like something straight out of the original Dragon Ball. Powerful bass and drum lines provide a strong backbone to the rest of the orchestra, and the CD quality really lets the music shine throughout the game. Sad moments are accompanied by haunting piano melody, and the military has its own theme full of brass instruments and victorious horns. I always feel weird talking about music in games because I am by no means very smart when it comes to that sort of thing, but Grandia just has such an epic score that it makes me want to trudge on through its hardest dungeons. It's songs like this that make moments like seeing the end of the world something very special. Speaking of the end of the world, we last left the party standing here in awe of the landscape of mysterious opportunity that stretched out before them. We don't get much time to savor this triumphant moment, however, as Sue is snatched by a weird, helicopter claw and tossed off the side, soon to be followed by both Justin and Fina. Now, I'm not totally sure how they all survived this fall. I guess the trees here are really spongy. Justin and Fina meet up alive on the forest floor of Blue Dragon Valley and go in search of Sue. They freak out because they believe that they find Sue being cooked in a giant cauldron, which is sort of dark, but alright. Luckily, this isn't the case, and we meet up with Sue once more, who's been hanging out with this slab of badass meat named Gadwin. Gadwin actually joins up with the party and decides to lead us to his home of Dite Village. Here in Dite, things are pretty swell, except for the fact that the rain is cursed. We offer to travel to Typhoon Tower and set things right, which we do with Gadwin's help. This formula of traveling to a new village, speaking with the Elder, and solving whatever problem is presented holds true until the final arc of the game rolls around. This includes saving a village from a volcano, trying to figure out how to turn villagers back to normal from being turned to stone, exploring a weird extra-dimensional hellscape. I personally don't mind how the narrative was sort of this strung along series of events while Justin tries to find information about Alent, but I was happy when the story began to pick up. Once Justin learns that Alent lies even further to the east across another stretch of ocean, he's a very important lesson to learn. As Justin tries to figure out a way to get across the ocean, Sue begins to feel under the weather. She sits out from the next dungeon where Justin, Fina, and Gadwin go in search for an item that will let them utilize a portal to cross the ocean. Upon returning to Dite Village, we receive the news that Sue has decided to stop adventuring and return home to Parm. Despite Justin arguing with her, her mind is made up, and as explained by Dr. Alma, she's just too young to keep up anymore. Justin, Sue, and Fina share a heartfelt goodbye as they decide to use the teleportation orb to send Sue home. Afterwards, Gadwin tells Justin that he can use his boat to cross the ocean, and then challenges him to a duel. Justin wins, and Gadwin also leaves the party, saying that Justin has grown stronger in the short time that they've known each other. This moment comes right around the midpoint of the game and is an important character progression for Justin. He wants to be an adventurer, and part of that is having to say goodbye to people. It's a theme that is important throughout the entire game. We see it at the very beginning with Justin's mom, and back then he's too afraid of backing out to even say goodbye in person. But now, he has to face that fear and say goodbye to two companions at once. This also leaves Justin and Fina with some time alone, which isn't something that they have had as of yet. We've seen Fina warming up to him throughout the first half of the game, and now she finally has an opportunity to share how she feels. I do have to say that moments like these in this game are really sweet, and it's really cool to have the female lead love interest drive the romance. After a little diversion with some mermaids, we finally arrive in East Alencia and make our way through the virgin forest, stopping to help out a couple of kids being attacked by an ent. Justin and Fina meet Rap, a humanoid who first blames them for turning his village to stone. We find that Cafu village with its xenophobic townspeople had to recently relocate after the Garlisle military moved in and constructed the ominously named Tower of Doom. Justin, having already been entangled with Garlisle multiple times, decides to help Rap destroy the tower, which we do fairly easily, meeting a fourth party member, Milda, along the way. At the top of the tower, we fight this weird alien-looking thing called a Gaia Battler, which leaves behind a gross little seed. We then take the seed back to Cafu for safekeeping, but the village is attacked by Garlisle, and Lean is able to steal the Gaia seed. As a punishment for saving the village, the Elder kicks us out. You're welcome, I guess. Luckily, Rap has a pretty good shoulder on his head. Good shoulder on his head? What the fuck did I write that for? Luckily, Rap has a pretty good head on his shoulders and decides to accompany us. Even more luckily, Milda mentions that the wise men in her village of Lane know information about Alent and Justin should go there next. This triggers a really long section of travel across forests, deserts, and mountains until we're able to find Lane Village. Here, the three wise men, Darlin, Durlin, and Dorlin, are able to tell us more info about Alent, after we search for Dorlin's missing horn in a weird, corrupted section of Lane Village. Seems like this Gaia thing is really fucking up these villages. After retrieving the good old Horn of Knowledge, we return to Zilpadan, a city in the middle of the desert, home to the little mascot bunny guys that are so cool. It's also home to a shrine to Angelo. This dungeon is huge and has these really awful, timed floating platform puzzles that cause you to do a bunch of platforming. After obtaining the Medal of Wisdom from the end of the dungeon, Garlisle shows up to be a nuisance, and this time they're incredibly successful. While being confronted by Mullen, the head of the Garlisle forces, General Ball, uses the power of the Icarians to activate a ton of golems in the ruins, causing a lot of destruction. The weirdest part about this is Lean and Fina are revealed to be Icarians, special winged twins born by the power of the spirits. General Ball kidnaps Fina for her Icarian power, causing Justin to board his flagship, the Grandeur. Here we have a showdown with Ball, ultimately handing him the Spirit Stone, but saving Fina and watching the ship go down in flames. From here, Justin thinks that Ball has been destroyed, and I should add that Lean, Mullen, and most of the Garlisle soldiers did decide to mutiny when they figured out that Ball was just trying to destroy the world. Finally, we have all the pieces we need to get to Alent, which just so happens to be located at the top of the mountain right next to Lane Village. Kind of. Turns out that Alent is like a huge floating space station because this is a JRPG and it's illegal for it not to be. It's also really goddamn weird. We finally meet the real Liete here, who divulges to us the history of the Angelo civilization, humans, Icarians, and the Spirit Stone. It's a real lore dump. Liete herself seems to be a very lonely and sad figure, fated to live on and observe the progress of the world through its many eras. So it doesn't take much convincing to get her to join our party, which is great because her magic usage is absolutely awesome. It is revealed to the player here that the world runs on a cycle, with the Spirit Stone gathering energy throughout the years, Gaia being born and feeding on that energy, and the Icarians sacrificing themselves to stop it. Justin, now being much more than just an adventurer, decides that it's time to break that cycle and stop Gaia once and for all. Ball lived through the destruction of his flagship and now plans on using the Spirit Stone that Justin gave up to fully revive Gaia. This unleashes major destruction upon the world, and ultimately Justin has to enter the Sanctuary of the Spirits and is gifted the Spirit Sword in order to end Gaia, a symbol that the will of the world's spirits is with him. So, with a fully formed party and Spirit Sword in hand, we head out to take care of Gaia once and for all. We travel to an Icarian city deep below Garlyle's J base in order to finally confront the twisted form of General Ball and crush Gaia. The hopes of the people of Valencia and the spirits are on our side. Justin is finally triumphant in stopping Ball's plan. This is a long story, and the final arc really pumped things up a notch. Grandia was quite the experience. I went into the game knowing that it was a classic from back in the PS1 days, though I didn't know what to expect from the story or the systems. What I got was a story about how one kid just wanted to set out on an adventure and what that really means. I also got a game with some of the most addicting combat from that era. The system's made to make anyone with a penchant for grinding water at the mouth. All in all, it took me about 45 hours to finish up Grandia's epic tale, and I skipped most of the available side content. While the voice acting is just bad, but endearing if you like this sort of thing, the music is good enough to listen to even when divorced from the original source material. Grandia is the kind of game I would recommend as a palate cleanser to someone who's been playing a lot of games with heavier subject matter. While it has its annoyances with dungeon design and pacing in the midsection, I think there's a lot here for almost anyone to enjoy. Maybe look up some maps on GameFAQs though. The characters are endearing and I think they'll stick with me for quite a while. And while the game's plot is nothing revolutionary, sometimes it just doesn't need to be. So that right there is Grandia, an adventurous JRPG tale that can be fun for anyone, and has more than a few special moments sprinkled throughout. Now I know that Grandia 2 is considered the best in the series by quite a lot of people, so I'm looking forward to playing that at some point in the future. But for right now, I think it's time we move on to something a little bit shorter. See you next time! Hey there everyone, how's it going? Welcome to the end card. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. If you got to the end, especially, thank you very much. This was a really long one. It took me about 50 hours to beat Grandia, and as you can tell, I'm still tired from COVID. Sounds great. I'm gonna throw some videos up on the screen. I don't know what yet. Probably actually just whatever YouTube wants. Next week is gonna be a Gundam video again, and then after that, probably another Gundam video. I don't even know what I'm doing for this end card, to be honest with you. I just throw a minute of myself talking up, because whatever. Thank you guys so much for taking part in that poll earlier this week, by the way. It was super cool. You guys are all super cool. And I will, hey, we'll see you next time.